Well, hello peoples, this is Sonic932, and welcome back to another episode of Random Creepypasta Stories. Now, today in Random Creepypasta Stories, we're going to be taking a look at another creepypasta that not a lot of people have covered, but, I've read this creepypasta, and, it's actually pretty good. It's pretty good. So, this creepypasta, if you couldn't already tell by the title, is called The Enigma of a Deathbringer. So, without further ado, let's begin this pasta for Halloween. The first piece of film ever created was made in the year of 1877. This film was under the title of Test, we found in a warehouse that belonged to my best friend's long-dead grandfather. As the title says, this was simply a test film and nothing more. Or that is what the title would lead you to believe. Back in those days, a recording could only go on for less than a minute. Anyone going into this wouldn't expect much. Surprise, it wasn't much at first. This film was like all the early films, black, white, and soundless. Also incredibly dull. It was like 35 seconds long and consisted of a man wearing a black suit walking on an empty sidewalk and a large crowd of people on the sidewalk opposite of him. It was nothing special, and again, it was only a test. But one thing was very strange about this film. After viewing it 10 times in one sitting, we started to notice the small changes that would occur every time we watched it. Sometimes a man sitting down on a bench would be slightly moved over to the right or left. Sometimes a woman wearing what looked to be a light gray dress would then be wearing a dark gray dress. It was just small, almost unnoticeable changes. This was fascinating to a few that watched this film, myself included. This was almost completely impossible, but somehow it was happening. The small group and I continued to watch for about 10 minutes. The changes became bigger, more noticeable, more terrifying. One more time, it was a minor car accident and the two drivers came out yelling at each other. Nothing too bad. Another time, it was a couple arguing. Then we got 20 minutes in and things changed drastically. Sometimes the crowd of people walking would change into a crowd of people fighting, brutally assaulting each other using blades, blunt weapons, and sometimes guns. Sometimes the crowd would be replaced by a pile of bloody, sometimes dismembered bodies. Things just got worse and worse from there. A man slamming a baby repeatedly on the pavement. A woman gutting a man while a child shoved her own thumbs into her very own eyes. A man in a wheelchair set on fire then pushed down the street between the two sidewalks. Horrible, awful things happened, and things just got progressively worse and worse. After about 35 minutes, we all started hearing sound coming from the film. This was also impossible. Every film back then was made incapable of having sound. This made things get so much worse. It's also one thing to just have people die, but having to hear their cries and screams and such makes it so much harder to bear. We would now hear the sound of knives cutting through the flesh of the victims, the screams of children as they are tortured, the sounds of explosions coming off screen. Eventually, the building behind the sidewalk opposite of a lone man walking had disappeared completely and showed off two towers side by side, the Twin Towers. We all knew what was coming next. The first plane hit, next play, and the second plane hits. Next play, people are walking off the building and hitting the ground, making horrible sounds. This film was made in 1887. There should be no possible way for this to be happening. It showed off a few other tragedies, the Columbine shooting, VTech, the Colorado theater shooting, public executions by the Nazis, and many more. That's when I noticed one thing hadn't changed this whole time. The man in the black suit walking on the sidewalk hadn't changed once at all. His movements, suit, face, hair color, skin color, height, everything remained the exact same. The sidewalk as well never changed. This is when I gave him the moniker, the Deathbringer. Eventually, I started to feel physically and mentally sick. I felt like I was going to vomit. I felt tired, ridiculously hungry, insane, dizzy, cold. I felt like I was dying. I passed out in around 16 minutes of viewing. I woke up hours later. Apparently the others had passed out as well. We were all bleeding from our nose and mouth. We looked up and saw one last play on the projector. It was the Deathbringer walking on the sidewalk outside of the building where we were watching the film. When he reached the end of the street this time, he started turning his head to the building, and then the projector died. Since then, we have had the film taken from us by what I assumed to be the FBI or CIA people or something like that. We were told not to say anything, but as you can see, they didn't stop me from talking. Not like anyone's going to believe me. That's why those guys aren't even keeping an eye on us. Well, at least I hope not. Anyway, we are then taken to a hospital to be checked out. Surprisingly, we had nothing wrong with us physically, but mentally it was the complete opposite of okay. Since then, my memories of that night have become very blurry initially. I started writing this as an attempt to remember more from the incident, but as I continue to write, I found out that I really don't want to remember. I don't want to remember a goddamn thing. I have nightmares every night of horrible, awful things now. Something like that film would have shown. It's been that very way for the past year and I've had it. As for my friends that were in that group, I haven't heard anything from them and they've since been reported missing. Apparently this happened over a time span of 1 year, but I didn't even know until I attempted to reach one of them through their family. I didn't keep in contact with them. I didn't really want to. If I had talked to them, that will only result in my memories of that awful night becoming even clearer. To be honest, I was relieved to hear that they were missing. Since they were gone, my memories of that night will forever be obscured. I guess I knew that I really didn't want to remember that night substantially. I see no reason to keep going on like this. Ever since that day, I stopped going outside less and less. I am now starving, but I can't build up the courage to go out. Why? Because sometimes at night, when I look outside, I swear that I see a man in a black suit walking on the sidewalk opposite to my house. Well, that's it for Enigma of the Deathbringer. So, what do I think of this creepypasta? Well, in actuality, this is actually a pretty good creepypasta. Like, I'm not gonna say it's the best one because, yeah, I've read better. But for what it's worth, this guy kind of uses the over dramatic gore to, express a point. Because back then, okay, let's face it, black and white films, even though most of them are supposed to be harmless, they could be pretty freaking scary just by themselves. But imagine seeing something like gore and death and actual atrocities which are considered horrific, like 9/11 and the Nazi executions, being portrayed in a black and white fashion. That's terrifying. Those events are terrifying by themselves, but imagine amplifying that by using the scary nature of the black and white films. That's pretty scary. But yeah, yes, it does fall into like, some cliches, like, the black man that doesn't really, change, and that he becomes real in real life. Like, seeing all those excessive gore, but at least they didn't use hyper realistic blood. At least they did not use that word, which that's good. But all for what it's worth, though, this is a pretty well written creepypasta. Like, I especially love the ending where he talks about like his life now after viewing that film, how like he's not mentally stable. I like that. I like that about the creepypasta, like showing like how that viewing that film affected his life. So overall, I give this creepypasta a read or listen because you listen to me talk about this creepypasta for like the past few minutes. But yeah, it's a pretty good creepypasta. But damn, I would be probably freaking out like if I saw a black and white version of like the 9/11 and the Nazi executions. Both horrible events, but amplified to scarier degrees. But what do you guys think of this creepypasta? What would you change from this creepypasta? So, if you guys like what you see, like, comment, subscribe, do whatever you want, and I will see you guys in the next creepypasta or whatever I do next. So, peace out, peoples, and a bye-bye.